Hi everyone, I'm Mary from DIY Montreal, and today I'm going to show you how to make a large picture frame with corner splines. It turns out there's a lot more that goes into making picture frames than meets the eye, like cutting rabbets, making sure your miters are perfect 45 degrees, clamping corners and getting them aligned, and cutting out small, thin strips on the table saw, and even making corner splines. A lot more goes into making a picture frame than I had ever thought, and I actually learned a lot making this project. To start off, I cut down my boards to a rough length, a little longer than what I would need it, and then I ripped them down on my table saw to the final width of 3 inches that I needed. For this project, I used poplar. First thing I wanted to do was make a rabbet on each of the boards. I started with a test piece and I measured as I went to check. Once I had the perfect measurements, I went ahead and ran the 4 boards through it. I'm making a rabbet to be able to accommodate the width of the glass and the backer that I'll be using for this picture frame. So the final depth and width of my rabbet was 3/8 deep by 1/4 inch wide. I also used my palm router with a roundover bit to take off the edge from the 3 remaining edges. Now that all my boards are ready, it's time to cut the miters. The first step is to make sure that your miter is set to a perfect 45-degree angle. You can use your speed square for this, but nothing beats running a test piece through it. Make one cut and then use a carpenter's square and use whatever square you have on hand to make sure it's at a perfect 45 degree and adjust as needed. I made my first cut towards the end of one board at a random spot, so I could carry it over to my glass, line it up, and mark where I'd make my second cut on the board. After I made my first cut and I tested to make sure it was the exact fit, I simply carried over the measurements onto a second board where I traced it and cut it out. And I simply repeated the same process for the 2 other sides. Once I had all my pieces cut, I first laid them all out on a flat surface and I did a dry fit to make sure everything was lining up perfectly. I then applied glue to each side of my miter joint and I clamped it into place. I used a carpenter's square for every single angle as I went to make sure everything was aligned. Then I used these homemade corner clamps that I had cut out and clamped them into place without using too much pressure, just enough to hold it nice and snugly. After the glue had dried, I took off all the clamps and got ready to make my splines. I wasn't really sure how deep the splines should be, and I did some research and I didn't really come up with anything. So having a 3-inch frame, I decided to make mine 2 inches deep. Now, if you have any, insights on this, please feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear, how deep should a spline be? So please leave a comment below. So once I had my blade set up, I clamped the frame to my jig and then made sure to line up the blade so it was about halfway through the depth of the frame. Then I simply ran it through the saw. I used some green tape on the back of the frame here just so I could minimize tear out. Not sure if this was necessary, but hey, it worked and it turned out great in the end. And hey, if you want to see how I made this spline jig, you can click on the link in the corner above here, or there's also a link in the description below. I cut some test splines just to see if I had the right width. Now, you're supposed to have these snug but not tight from my understanding. So once I had the width down perfectly, I went ahead and cut them on the table saw, and I'm using the same material here, just poplar. I cut them down into smaller triangles, did a dry fit, and once I was happy with the dry fit, I applied glue to both sides and pushed it back into the corners. And I let this dry for a few hours. Once the glue had dried, I proceeded to cut off the excess material. Now you could use a bandsaw for this, and I debated, and I actually decided to just use my flush trim saw. So I cut as close as I could to the frame without actually cutting into the frame. After that, I just used my orbital sander, and if you have a benchtop sander, which would be really great for this, but I don't, so I used my orbital sander and then I lightly finished with hand sanding. Okay, now we're into the home stretch. So now it's time to apply finish, and I debated painting this, staining it, painting it, staining it, but I decided since it was such a nice wood piece that I would stain it, so I went ahead and used my favorite stain, Early American. And after the stain had dried, I laid the frame flat on its face and I dropped in the glass and then put in my picture and finished off with a backer that I had cut to the same size as my glass. To hold it into place, I'm going to use glazier points, at least I think that's what they're called. And these are pretty simple to install. You just use a screwdriver and kind of rock them back and forth and push gently, obviously trying not to break the glass. Hey, if you like this video, hit that like button or leave a comment below. And subscribe to my channel for more DIY videos to come. Thanks for watching.